Frank, at your age, you should be thinking about slowing down, not speeding up, my doctor said during my annual checkup. I was 66, recently widowed, and apparently supposed to spend my remaining years in a rocking chair. Even my own physician thought I was too old to chase new dreams. But sometimes the best medicine isn't what the doctor prescribes. Sometimes it's proving everyone wrong about what you're capable of at any age. What happened over the next 5 years didn't just change my life, it changed everything I thought I knew about aging, ambition, and what it really means to live fully until your last breath. My name is Frank, and until I was 66 years old, I thought my story was basically over. For 38 years, I'd worked as a regional manager for a mid-sized manufacturing company. Good job, steady paycheck, reliable retirement plan. I was what you'd call a company man, loyal, dependable, and completely convinced that my worth was tied to my employment status. Then my wife Margaret died. Cancer took her in 6 months, despite every treatment, every hope, every prayer. Suddenly, the house we'd shared for 40 years felt like a museum, and the retirement we'd planned together became a solo journey I wasn't sure I wanted to take. The grief was overwhelming. But what surprised me was the emptiness that came after. Margaret had been my partner in everything, and without her, I felt like I was just existing. That's when Dr. Peterson delivered his well-meaning advice during what was supposed to be a routine visit. Frank, I know this has been a difficult year, he said, reviewing my chart. Loss at your age can be particularly challenging. Have you considered joining some senior activities? Maybe a book club or volunteer work. It's important to stay social, but also to accept your limitations. Accept my limitations. Those 3 words hit me harder than Margaret's diagnosis had. What limitations? I asked. Dr. Peterson looked uncomfortable. Well, at 66, your body isn't what it was at 40. Your energy levels are naturally declining. It's normal to want to slow down, spend time with grandchildren, enjoy the fruits of your labor. What if I don't want to slow down? He smiled, that patronizing smile I was beginning to recognize, the one people give you when you're old enough to qualify for Medicare. Frank, denial is part of the grieving process. But it's important to be realistic about this stage of your life. You've worked hard. You've earned the right to rest. Rest, like I was a racehorse being put out to pasture. I left that appointment angrier than I'd been since Margaret's funeral. Not at Dr. Peterson, he meant well, but at the assumption that turning 66 meant turning in my dreams. The idea came to me 3 weeks later, in the most unlikely place, my grandson's elementary school computer lab. Tommy had forgotten his science project at home, and I'd volunteered to drive it over. While waiting for him to come down from class, I wandered into the computer lab, where a young teacher was trying to explain email to a group of 8-year-olds. Double quotes, email is like sending a letter. But through the computer, she was saying, clearly, frustrated, "No, Tyler, you can't email a sandwich. It has to be words or pictures." I watched these kids, digital natives who could navigate an iPad before they could tie their shoes, struggling with basic computer concepts. And I watched this teacher, probably in her 20s, getting overwhelmed trying to manage both technology and classroom behavior. That's when it hit me. For 38 years, I'd managed teams, solved logistical problems, and coordinated complex projects. I'd learned to use computers when they were the size of refrigerators. I'd adapted to new technology, new processes, new challenges throughout my entire career. But more importantly, I had something these young teachers didn't: patience, experience. The kind of calm authority that comes from decades of dealing with people and problems. "Excuse me," I said to the teacher during a break. "I'm Tommy's grandfather. I couldn't help but notice you're having some challenges with the computer instruction." She looked embarrassed. "It's not my strongest subject." I'm great with kids, but the technology component of teaching nowadays is overwhelming. What if I told you there were probably thousands of teachers in your exact situation? I'd say you're probably right. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of grief this time, but because of possibility. Asterisk. Over the next month, I did something I hadn't done since college. I researched. I spent hours at the library and on my home computer, learning about the education technology market. What I found was a massive gap between what teachers needed and what was available. The existing solutions were either too complex, designed by tech people who'd never taught a class, or too simple, treating teachers like they were as clueless as their students. There was nothing designed specifically for experienced educators who are comfortable with people but intimidated by technology. I started visiting schools, talking to teachers, sitting in on technology training sessions. What I heard was the same story everywhere: talented, experienced educators feeling lost and frustrated because nobody had bothered to create tools that worked the way teachers actually thought. That's when I decided to create those tools myself. The reaction to this decision was less than encouraging. Dad, what are you talking about? My son Michael said when I called to tell him about my idea. You don't know anything about education technology. I know about education. And I can learn about technology. You're 67 years old. People your age don't start tech companies. Why not? Because he paused, searching for a diplomatic way to say it, because it's not realistic. You should be thinking about retirement, not starting over. My daughter Lisa was more direct. Dad, I'm worried about you. First you were depressed after Mom died. Now you're having these grandiose fantasies about becoming some kind of entrepreneur. Maybe you should talk to someone. I am talking to someone. I'm talking to you. I mean a professional, a counselor who specializes in grief and aging. Like they were medical conditions that required treatment, but the worst reaction came from my own industry colleagues. I'd called my former boss, Jim, thinking he might be interested in investing or at least offering some encouragement. We'd worked together for 15 years. Frank, I've got to be honest with you, Jim said. This sounds like a midlife crisis, except you're having it 20 years too late. Education technology is a young person's game. The learning curve alone would take you years, and frankly, by the time you figured it out, you'd be too old to enjoy any success. What if I'm not too old? Frank, you're a great guy, and you were a solid manager. But starting a tech company at your age, it's not realistic. Why don't you use your severance to travel? Maybe take up a hobby. There's no shame in acting your age, acting my age. Another phrase I was learning to hate, but the comment that really lit a fire under me came from an unexpected source. I decided to attend a local entrepreneur meetup, thinking I might learn something or maybe find someone willing to listen to my idea with an open mind. The meeting was held in a trendy coffee shop downtown, and I was clearly the oldest person there by about 30 years. Young people with laptops and energy drinks filled every table, talking about disruption and scalability and other buzzwords I was still learning. When it came time for the pitch practice portion of the evening, I raised my hand. The moderator, a kid who couldn't have been older than Tommy's teacher, looked surprised. Oh, I'm sure. What's your name? Frank Thompson. And what's your project? I gave my 30-second pitch about education technology for experienced teachers. The room was politely quiet. When I finished, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. That's an interesting idea, she said, but wouldn't it make more sense for someone who actually understands the target demographic to develop it? I mean, no offense, but you're kind of the opposite of tech savvy. Before I could respond, another voice chimed in. Plus, education tech moves really fast. By the time someone your age learned the necessary programming languages and understood the market, the opportunity would be gone. The moderator tried to be diplomatic. Frank, have you considered being an advisor to a younger team? Your experience could be valuable in a consulting capacity. Consulting capacity. Translation: let the real entrepreneurs handle this, Grandpa. I left that meeting feeling smaller than I had since Margaret's funeral. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe 67 was too old to chase dreams that belonged to people young enough to be my grandchildren. But as I sat in my car in that coffee shop parking lot, something Margaret used to say came back to me. Frank, the difference between impossible and inevitable is usually just one person refusing to give up. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If everyone thought I was too old to learn, I'd prove them wrong by learning everything. I enrolled in online courses, Python programming, user interface design, education theory, market research methodologies. For 6 months, I treated learning like a full-time job. 8 hours a day, I sat at my computer, working through tutorials, reading industry publications, and slowly building the skills everyone assumed I was too old to acquire. The learning curve was steep. There were days when I wanted to throw my computer out the window. But there were also breakthrough moments. The first time I successfully wrote a simple program, the first time I understood how databases worked, the first time I created a user interface that didn't look like it was designed in 1995. More importantly, I started building my first prototype. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't revolutionary, but it was exactly what that teacher at Tommy's school had needed: a simple, intuitive way for experienced educators to manage classroom technology without feeling like they needed a computer science degree. I called it Teachees. After 8 months of development, I had a working beta version. It was time to test it with real teachers. I reached out to 5 elementary schools in my area, offering free technology training using my prototype software. The first school turned me down immediately. We already have a technology consultant. The principal said, someone younger and more current. The second school was more polite, but equally dismissive. We appreciate the offer, but we're not really looking for experimental solutions. The third school principal listened to my pitch and then asked, what makes you think you understand what teachers need better than the companies that already provide these services? It was a fair question because I said those companies are run by people who've never managed anything more complex than a startup team. I've spent for decades learning how real people actually work, how they learn, and what they need to be successful. Plus, I'm not trying to disrupt anything. I'm trying to make things easier. That principal, Mrs. Chen, agreed to let me run a pilot program with her most technologically challenged teachers. The results exceeded my wildest expectations. Within 2 weeks. Teachers who had been struggling with basic computer tasks were confidently managing digital classrooms, creating interactive lessons, and actually enjoying the technology components of their jobs. More importantly, they were telling other teachers about Teachees. Word spread through the education community faster than I could have imagined. Within 3 months, I had requests from 27 schools wanting to implement my system, but I was still just one 68-year-old guy working out of his home office. That's when I made the scariest decision of my post-Margaret life. I decided to turn Teachees into a real business. I used my retirement savings to hire a small team, a young developer who could scale my prototypes, a former teacher who understood the market, and a part-time accountant who could help me navigate business regulations. The team was small, but we had something the big education technology companies didn't. We actually listened to teachers instead of trying to impress them. 6 months later, we had 200 schools using Teachees. A year after that, we had 1,500. That's when the big companies started paying attention. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Almost exactly 3 years after Dr. Peterson had advised me to slow down, Mr. Thompson. This is Sarah Chen from Educorp. We'd like to discuss a potential acquisition of Teachees. Educorp was one of the largest education technology companies in the country, the same type of company whose representatives had dismissed my ideas at that entrepreneur meet-up. I'm not sure we're interested in selling, I told her. You haven't heard our offer yet. The offer was $12 million. For a company I'd started at 67 with my retirement savings and a crazy idea that everyone said would never work, I didn't accept immediately. Not because the money wasn't good, but because I wanted to savor the moment. 3 years earlier, I'd been a widowed retiree who was supposed to be acting his age. Now I was the founder of a company that industry leaders were fighting to acquire, but the real validation came from an unexpected source, asterisk. My annual physical that year was very different from the one 3 years earlier. Dr. Peterson reviewed my chart with obvious confusion. Frank, your blood pressure is better than it's been in a decade. Your stress levels are down. Your cholesterol has improved, and frankly, you seem like a different person. I feel like a different person. What changed? I told him about Teachees, about the acquisition, about proving everyone wrong who thought I was too old to start over. Dr. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. Frank, I owe you an apology. When you asked about starting something new, I should have encouraged you instead of trying to manage your expectations. You were trying to be realistic. No. I was being ageist. I made assumptions about what you were capable of based on your age instead of your actual abilities. That was unprofessional and, frankly, wrong. He paused, then smiled. I'm 58 years old, and I've been thinking about starting a concierge medical practice after hearing your story. I think I'm going to stop making excuses about being too late in my career to try something new. Asterisk, the Teachees acquisition made local news, which led to national attention, which led to speaking engagements and interview requests. Suddenly, I was being invited to talk about senior entrepreneurship and aging in the digital economy. The same people who had dismissed me as too old were now asking me to share my secrets, but the real impact wasn't the money or the recognition. It was the letters. Hundreds of them. From people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond who had been told they were too old, too late, to set in their ways to chase new dreams. A 62-year-old woman who used my story as motivation to open an art studio after her corporate layoff. A 71-year-old man who started a consulting business after retirement and was now busier than he'd ever been. A 58-year-old teacher who left education to become a freelance curriculum designer. Each letter reminded me that ageism isn't just individual prejudice, it's societal waste. How many brilliant ideas, innovative solutions, and valuable contributions are we losing because we've convinced ourselves that creativity and ambition have expiration dates? Asterisk, today, at 72, I run a small venture capital fund that specifically invests in businesses started by entrepreneurs over 50, not because I think older entrepreneurs are better than younger ones, but because I know they're just as capable, and they face systemic barriers that have nothing to do with their actual abilities. In the past 2 years, we've funded a 61-year-old woman who invented a revolutionary physical therapy device, a 55-year-old man who created a meal delivery service for diabetics, and a 68-year-old couple who developed software that helps seniors manage complex medication schedules. Every investment reminds me that experience isn't a liability, it's a competitive advantage that the market consistently undervalues. My son Michael, who initially thought I was having a late-life crisis, now works as our fund's business development director. I'm sorry I doubted you, Dad, he told me recently. I was so focused on what you couldn't do that I missed what you could do. My daughter Lisa still worries about me. But now it's because I work too much, not too little. And Dr. Peterson, he successfully launched his concierge practice and refers other older patients to my talks when they express interest in starting something new. Margaret's death taught me that life is unpredictably short. But starting Teachees taught me something equally important. Life is also unexpectedly long. At 66, I thought my productive years were behind me. I was wrong. At 72, I'm busier, more fulfilled, and more optimistic about the future than I was at 40. The best medicine isn't what doctors prescribe. It's not slowing down when everyone expects you to. It's not accepting limitations that exist only in other people's minds. The best medicine is proving to yourself and everyone else that your best years don't have to be behind you just because you've accumulated a few more birthdays. Age is not a barrier to starting something new. It's not a reason to stop dreaming, stop growing, or stop contributing. It's just a number that tells you how long you've been learning, and in a world that changes as fast as ours does. Experience isn't a disadvantage, it's the ultimate competitive edge. So to everyone who's been told they're too old, too late, or too set in their ways, you're not. You're exactly the right age to start the next chapter of your life. The question isn't whether you're too old to chase your dreams. The question is, what are you waiting for? Have you ever been told you're too old to try something new? Have you achieved success later in life that surprised everyone? Share your story in the comments. Age is just the beginning of what you're capable of, not the end.